Joining me now is New York Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks. He is the ranking member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Good to be with you. Thank you for having me.
So thank you. We appreciate your coming in studio. Let's start right there. I just want to get your reaction to the news that President-elect Trump does intend to nominate Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. What do you make of that?
Well, in comparison to a lot of these other appointments, he does seem to make more sense. I hope and look forward to trying to work with him. I know that we're not going to agree on many things, but that's okay to have a debate and to work and to focus on what needs to be done, particularly with our allies and our friends, is extremely important. I know he has been focused, as I have in the past, on the Western Hemisphere, and to make sure that our allies and our friends in the Western Hemisphere is strong and safe and working with us is tremendously important. So I look, hopefully to look forward. The only question that I would have is two things. Number one, I wonder what authority he will actually have, that the president will not then step in, because the president has been very clear that he thinks it's him and only him that can make certain decisions. And I do notice, and noticed very much so, how Senator Rubio changed his mind going into the presidency, where once he's one of the staunchest supporters about funding for Ukraine against Russia. But it seemed as though when the president got in and started talking to individuals, he changed and did not vote for the last funding for Ukraine. So it gives me a concern as to, is he going to listen to himself and his own instincts and try to push that? Or is Donald Trump going to be the individual that's going to tell him what to do no matter what? Well,
that sets me up perfectly for my next question to you, which is about Ukraine, because both President-elect Trump and Senator Rubio have talked about the need for a negotiated settlement. As you know, the president-elect, as a candidate, said he thinks he can end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. The implications there would be that Ukraine would have to give up ultimately some of its territory that Russia has illegally claimed. Would you support a negotiated settlement?
My position has been that the negotiated settlement should be something that the Ukrainian government wants. President Zelensky should be in a position to discuss the settlement. And the whole idea, President Zelensky has always said that there should be a settlement, but we wanted to put him in a position that when they were negotiating, they would negotiate from strength and not weakness. What President-elect Trump is talking about is basically putting them in a position of weakness. If you don't give them what they need to defend themselves and defend their democracy, then they go to the table in a weakened position, and then they give up what is their sovereignty and their land to Vladimir Putin, which also gives him the signal that he can do that in other areas with some of our NATO allies, particularly just take the territory.
Let me ask you about President-elect Trump's intention to nominate Tulsi Gabbard, your former Democratic colleague, as Director of National Intelligence. What do you make of that? She's someone who has parroted Russian propaganda. Do you think that she has the credentials to serve in that role?
Absolutely not. Look, when she served on the Foreign Affairs Committee, when she abruptly went off to meet with Assad and other things, I think that she is a risk to our national security. I think that she would not pass the necessary screening, the necessary background checks and security clearances that are necessary for someone in that position. She would be found not qualified, and one of the reasons why I think the president is trying to find alternative methods of getting her cleared, because he knows that she does not fit the qualifications for that particular position. Absolutely unqualified, absolutely, I think, a threat to our national security.
Let me ask you, that's a strong statement that you think she's a threat to national security. Your colleague, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, went so far as to say that Gabbard is, quote, likely a Russian asset. Do you agree with that?
I don't know whether she's an asset or not, but I know that based upon what she has done, based upon her actions, it's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to secret information. It's a threat to the moving forward of our country to defend ourselves and to help our allies to work, who are working with us. And it would be something that I think that Vladimir Putin and Assad and those types would be smiling about.
Let's turn to domestic politics now. I want to ask you about the election results. President-elect Trump in the borough of Queens, your borough, Some votes still yet to be counted, but Vice President Kamala Harris performed 10 points worse than Joe Biden in 2020. She got nearly 1 million fewer votes than Biden did statewide in New York. Donald Trump increased his tally from 2020 to 2024. Congressman, how do you explain that?
No, what I'd rather explain is that in 2022, we lost seats in the House in New York. We lost 5 of them. And in 2024, we have all 5 back. So it showed that there was a huge reverse. We flipped 3 seats in New York in 2024. In Nassau County, which has been moving toward Republican side, we had Laura Gillen win. Upstate New York and Syracuse. In the Mid-Hudson region, 3 seats we flipped, 2 seats that we won additionally in a special election, and they held on. So there's 5 seats we won back in New York. So it shows to me that New York, and there's not one, Queens County, I'm the chair of the Queens County Democratic Party. We did not lose 1 Democratic seat in Queens County.
And yet, Congressman, you do not have control of the House again. And again, Trump expanded his support in your borough. Kamala Harris lost support from where President Biden was in 2020. Just writ large, when you look at the election results, what do you think went wrong?
Well, I think that what happened is what you look at, of course, when you talk about the economy and you talk about immigration, those are issues that were important and to individuals in that area. I think that clearly, again, they did not resonate the issues to understand that when you talk about the economy, for example, it all started with the pandemic. 10 nations, 10 democratic nations around the world where there was either a conservative government or a liberal government were all voted out thereafter if they were in charge during that pandemic. But we've got a better way to message that and to let folks to understand that, and we've got to do that immediately. When you talk about immigration, we tried the real job, and then people who should they hold accountable on immigration and immigration reform, not done by the president, actually. It should be done by the United States Congress. It is our job to do immigration reform. We tried to do so. President Trump stopped it. So, but those were the main issues that were out there that resonated with the people. We did not have the appropriate, or we didn't respond in a timely manner. And I think that we can do that, and we should do that, because all we have to do is tell the truth.
I want to ask you about this report in Axios. They're citing a senior Democratic lawmaker who is saying they're upset with Nancy Pelosi's influence on the party, saying, quote, she needs to take a seat, and saying she is not being respectful of Leader Jeffries. Basically, the implications that she came out, talked about the election, sharply criticized the Harris campaign and President Biden. Do you agree with that assessment?
Let me just tell you, that Leader Jeffries is doing one heck of a job. I've heard Nancy Pelosi say that. You know, when you think about it, Leader Jeffries is the first leader to gain seats in his first term as the leader since Dick Gephardt. When you look at the number of seats we flipped, the number of individuals who protected their seats, it's more than the Republican side. So we are closer now than where we were. And Leader Jeffries has been a heck of a leader, keeping us together, moving and getting advice and talking to, whether it's former Speaker Pelosi, whether it's Leader Steny Hoyer, whether it's Jim Clyburn, those that have been there beforehand. But he's been great in working us and pulling us all together. And he's a fantastic leader for our party.
Well, we're going to have him on Meet the Press on Sunday, so we'll hear from him directly. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate your time on this Friday.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app, or follow us on social media.